He suspected his black maid was stealing from him. For 3 weeks, he watched her slip out with bags she didn't bring in. So one night, he followed her through the rain, ready to catch her red-handed. What he discovered left him speechless. Martin Riggs was 46 years old and owned prime real estate in 3 states. He noticed everything: market fluctuations, zoning changes, every percentage point of return. But he'd never really noticed Rebecca Johnson. She'd worked for him for 12 years. Arrived before dawn, kept his world pristine, then vanished through the service entrance like she'd never been there at all. He didn't know she was 35. Didn't know she had 2 kids. Didn't know their names, their ages, where they went to school. She was efficient, punctual, invisible. Exactly what he wanted in household staff. Until 3 weeks ago. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. Martin noticed Rebecca leaving each evening carrying 2 bulging shopping bags. Bags she definitely hadn't brought that morning. It kept happening. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then Tuesday and Thursday too. Same bags, same hurried exit through the side door. His mind went where it always went with people like her. She's taking something. He checked his inventory. The wine cellar, the pantry, his home office. Nothing obviously missing. He reviewed security footage, watched her movements throughout the day. Normal routine. But those bags kept appearing at the end of her shift. Heavy, full of something. The question gnawed at him. What's she hiding? Martin told himself he had every right to know. This was his home. His property. His employee. If Rebecca was stealing from him, he needed proof. He'd been generous with her salary. Well, reasonable for the market. And this was how she repaid him? So on a rainy Tuesday evening, Martin decided to follow her. He left his home office early, got in his Mercedes, parked it down the block where she wouldn't notice. Waited. The rain drummed against the windshield. His breath fogged the glass. At 6:47 p.m., Rebecca emerged from the service entrance. Her uniform was covered by a worn coat pulled tight against the weather. Those 2 bags hung heavy in her hands, weighing her shoulders down. She didn't look around, didn't seem to notice his car. Just walked to the bus stop with steady, tired steps. Martin's chest tightened. Tonight I'll know the truth. She took the number 47 bus heading south. Martin followed 3 cars back, tracking the bus through traffic. They moved deeper into the city, past the luxury developments his company had built, through neighborhoods marked Urban Renewal Zone on his project maps, past blocks where he'd purchased entire buildings, renovated them, and tripled the rents. The bus crossed into the Riverside District, historically black neighborhood, now halfway through revitalization. His company owned 4 properties here. Another 6 were in escrow. Rebecca got off at Morrison and 3rd, near the old Riverside Community Church. The building had been there since 1963. Martin knew because it was on the demolition list for his newest project. Paint peeling, windows boarded up, parking lot full of potholes. An eyesore in what would soon be prime waterfront property. She walked around back, disappeared down a side alley. Martin parked, pulled up his collar and followed. The alley was dark, wet, lined with overflowing dumpsters. Rebecca stopped at a metal door, knocked twice. The door opened. Warm light spilled out into the rain. Martin caught a glimpse of faces inside, heard voices, laughter. Rebecca stepped through. The door closed behind her. Martin waited 30 seconds, then approached the door. It wasn't locked. He opened it slowly, carefully. Concrete steps led down into a basement. He could hear voices more clearly now. Dozens of people talking, the clatter of dishes, children laughing. He descended the stairs. The basement was packed. Folding tables lined the walls. People sat eating from paper plates and styrofoam bowls. Black and brown families mostly. Elderly folks, young mothers with children, a few men who looked like they'd been sleeping rough. The smell of hot food filled the air. Someone had set up a small sound system. Gospel music played softly in the background. And there, at a folding table near a portable stove, was Rebecca. She'd taken off her coat. Her hair, which she always wore pinned up in his home, hung loose around her shoulders. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt that said Riverside Strong. She was ladling soup into bowls, handing out sandwiches, greeting people by name with a smile Martin had never seen on her face. "Miss Rebecca, you got any more of those sandwiches?" A teenage boy stepped up. "Made extra for you, Darius. Turkey and cheese, just how you like it." She handed him 2 wrapped sandwiches. "How's your mama doing?" "Better. She got that interview you told her about." "Good. You tell her I'm praying for her." A little girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged on Rebecca's sleeve. "Miss Rebecca, where does all the food come from?" Rebecca knelt down to the child's eye level. "From people who care, baby. And I make some of it myself, so you grow up strong and healthy." Martin couldn't breathe. Those bags weren't stolen goods. They were groceries. Supplies. Food she'd bought with her own money, her salary, the one he paid her, to feed all these people. People his developments had displaced. Families who couldn't afford the luxury urban living his buildings provided. An older woman at one of the tables caught sight of him standing on the stairs. Her eyes narrowed. She said something to the person next to her, who turned to look. Then another. The room's energy shifted. Rebecca felt it. She turned, followed everyone's gaze, and saw Martin standing there in his expensive coat, rainwater dripping onto the concrete floor. Her face didn't show surprise, just resignation, like she'd always known this moment would come. "Everyone keep eating," she said calmly. "It's fine." But the warmth had drained from the room. People were staring at Martin now. Some with suspicion, others with recognition. They knew who he was. Martin Riggs. Riggs Development Corporation. The man whose buildings had pushed them out of their homes. Martin couldn't find words. His mind was reeling. She could have asked me for help. She could have told me. But standing there, seeing the way people looked at him, seeing the way Rebecca stood between him and her community like she was protecting them from him, Martin understood something that made his stomach turn. After 12 years of working in his home, Rebecca had decided something about him. She didn't trust him. Not with her community. Not with her truth. Not with the mercy she showed to people he'd helped make invisible. Martin backed up the stairs. His hands were shaking. He pushed through the door, stumbled into the alley. Rain hit his face, cold and harsh. He walked back to his car, got in, and sat there, watching that basement door, watching warm light glow from the building's windows, waiting. 2 hours passed, maybe more. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't read. The rain kept falling. Finally, the door opened. People started leaving. Families, individuals, all with fuller stomachs, warmer faces. Some carried extra food in containers. Rebecca stood at the door, hugging people goodbye, pressing bags of sandwiches into their hands. When the last person left, she emerged carrying those same 2 bags. Empty now, collapsed flat. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. She walked slowly toward the bus stop. Martin rolled down his window. Rebecca. She stopped, turned. Her face showed no surprise, no fear. Just a deep, quiet sadness that cut right through him. "Get in," he said. For a long moment she didn't move. Rain soaked through her coat. Water ran down her face. Then, finally, she walked to the passenger door and got in. They sat in silence. The rain drummed on the roof. The windows fogged. Neither of them spoke. Martin gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "How long have you been doing this?" Rebecca stared out the windshield at the rain. 12 years, she said quietly. "Since my family lost our home." The words landed like a blow. Martin's mouth went dry. What? Different developer. Same playbook. Her voice was even matter-of-fact. "I was 23. Working 2 jobs. Still couldn't make the new rent after they renovated. We had 30 days to leave." She turned to look at him then. Really look at him. "So I've been doing this for 12 years, Mr. Riggs. Feeding the people your buildings push out. Because somebody has to give a damn." Martin couldn't find words. His throat felt tight. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally managed. Rebecca's laugh was soft, bitter. "Tell you what? That your business destroys communities? That the urban renewal you're so proud of means families like mine lose everything?" She shook her head. "What would you have done? Made it about how you're not like other developers? Offered charity to make yourself feel better?" Each word was quiet but cut deep. "I needed this job, Mr. Riggs. I needed the health insurance for my kids. So I kept my head down, did my work, and kept my real life separate from yours." She looked back out at the rain. "I didn't need your permission to care about my community. And I definitely didn't need your guilt." Silence filled the car. Martin started the engine. "Where do you live?" "Riverside Gardens. Building C." He knew that building. His company had tried to buy it last year. The residents had organized, fought back, kept it in community hands. He drove in silence through streets he'd reshaped but never really seen. Past corner stores he'd replaced with coffee shops. Past apartment buildings he'd converted to condos. Past people, black and brown people, walking in the rain because bus service got cut when the neighborhood improved. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to a modest apartment complex. Rebecca reached for the door handle. "Rebecca." She paused. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him one more time. Her eyes were tired, sad, but not unkind. "I believe you are, Mr. Riggs. But sorry doesn't put families back in homes. Sorry doesn't undo 12 years of people losing everything so you could profit." She opened the door, grabbed her empty bags. "I'll see you tomorrow morning. Same time." She got out, closed the door gently, and walked toward her building. Martin watched her climb the stairs, unlock her door, disappear inside. He sat there in his car, rain pounding the roof, staring at that building. And for the first time in his 46 years, Martin Riggs realized he had no idea who he actually was, or what his success had really cost. Martin's Mercedes idled beneath a broken streetlight, its polished hood reflecting the fractured glow like shattered glass. He'd parked deliberately, close enough to seem casual, far enough to avoid the appearance of ambush. When Rebecca finally emerged from the community center, she paused on the crumbling steps, her silhouette backlit by the warm light spilling from inside. Then she looked directly at him. "I know you've been following me." Her voice carried across the empty street without effort, without drama. She walked toward him with the same measured pace she used in his office hallways. Martin stepped from the car, rehearsed explanations dissolving on his tongue. You couldn't just ask." She stopped 10 feet away, arms crossed not defensively but as if holding something precious close. "You had to treat me like a criminal first. The supplies. You think I'm stealing. Of course you do." Her laugh was bitter and brief. "Has it ever occurred to you to wonder why I need those supplies? Where your buildings send people?" The question landed like a fist. Martin opened his mouth, found nothing there. "I was 14 when they came for our neighborhood," Rebecca continued, her voice steady as a blade. "Different developer. Same playbook. Same promises about revitalization." She gestured at the community center behind her. "These people. They're living the sequel." "Rebecca, I didn't. I work for you because I need health insurance for my kids," she said. "But I won't apologize for helping my community survive what you create." Martin glanced at his car, suddenly ashamed of its leather interior. "Let me drive you home. It's late. I've been taking the bus for 12 years. Rebecca was already turning away. "I don't need your guilt-driven charity now." She walked into the darkness beyond the streetlight's reach, leaving Martin standing beside his expensive car like a monument to everything she'd just dismantled. Martin didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., he sat in his home office, pulling up project files he'd signed off on without a second thought. The pattern emerged like a stain spreading across a map. Property after property in historically black neighborhoods, acquisition reports noting minimal community resistance, plans approved without meaningful input from residents who'd lived there for generations. He found Rebecca's old neighborhood in the municipal archives. The developer had demolished it for luxury lofts in 2004. 300 families displaced. Rebecca would have been 14, just as she'd said. The archived photos showed a vibrant block, corner stores, a barbershop, families on stoops. Now it was glass and steel, starting rent $3,500 for a studio. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at 6 as always. Martin waited in the kitchen, coffee growing cold. "Rebecca, about last night. We don't need to discuss my personal life, Mr. Riggs." She moved past him to the sink, her professionalism a wall he'd built himself. "You've made it clear where the boundaries are." That evening, Martin drove to the community center. He slipped into the back row, hyper-aware of being the only white face in the room. A grandmother spoke about 40 years in her apartment, evicted with 30 days' notice. A father described his family scattered across 3 counties, unable to afford anything in their own neighborhood. Businesses closed, churches shuttered. An elder stood, voice steady and cutting. "Urban renewal means Negro removal. Always has." Martin sat with his discomfort, sweat dampening his collar, understanding finally that this wasn't abstract economics. These were lives. Rebecca's life. And he'd built his empire on their erasure. The books piled up on Martin's desk, histories of redlining, studies on gentrification, analyses of racial capitalism. He traced his family's wealth back through decades of property records and lending documents, finding what he'd never wanted to see. His grandfather's real estate fortune built on FHA loans that explicitly excluded black families. The foundation of everything he owned was discrimination codified into law. Then Rebecca's son was profiled. She arrived at Martin's home at 8 p.m., still in her coat, hands shaking with fury. Your security detained Marcus at the Riverside building. 16 years old, waiting for me after school, and they put him against a wall. Martin's stomach dropped. I'll fire the company. That's not enough. Rebecca's voice cracked. You trained them to see my son as a threat. Your hiring practices, your tenant screening, your whole operation. Who do you think you're signaling is welcome and who isn't? The conversation that followed stripped him bare. She walked him through every policy he'd approved without thinking. Criminal background checks that disproportionately excluded black applicants, security protocols that treated young black men as suspects, marketing materials featuring only white faces in upscale clothing. I've worked for you 12 years. Rebecca stood in his marble foyer, exhausted and done with gentleness. Have you ever asked about my life? My kids' names? What I do when I leave here? The silence stretched between them. Martin knew his accountant's children, Emma and Noah. He knew his attorney summered in the Hamptons. He could recite his business partner's golf handicaps. But Rebecca, he knew she was efficient, reliable, invisible. Marcus and Zoe, Rebecca said quietly. My children's names are Marcus and Zoe. Marcus wants to be an architect. Zoe reads 3 grades above level. I organize community meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I've been doing it for 5 years. Rebecca, I'm sorry. That's not an accident, Mr. Riggs. She turned toward the door. That's a choice. The development plans arrived on Martin's desk with a celebratory note from his partners. Perfect timing, this neighborhood's finally turning around. He studied the architectural renderings. Where Mount Zion Baptist Church stood, the plan showed a glass and steel tower. The sanctuary, 60 years of community history, would become a luxury amenity space. A gym. Martin stared at the phrase, turning around. Turning from what? Turning to what? The answer sat heavy in his chest, turning white and wealthy. He called Rebecca. Would you take me to the church? The surprise in her silence spoke volumes. You're asking. Yes. Pastor Williams met them at the doors, weathered hands gesturing to the building's bones. We held civil rights meetings here in '65. Dr. King's people sat in those pews. He pointed to the fellowship hall. Fed 300 families during the '08 recession. Married my parents here. Buried them here too. Children's artwork covered the Sunday school walls. Crayon drawings of Bible stories, handprints in paint, names and dates marking generations. History lived in every corner, in the scuff marks on the floors, in the hymnal pages worn soft by decades of fingers. An older woman approached, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. My grandmother helped build this church with her own hands in 1963. She mixed cement, laid bricks, worked after her shift cleaning white folks' houses. She looked directly at Martin. And you're going to put condos here? Martin pulled out his phone, found the marketing materials his team had prepared. Luxury urban living in elegant script. The models in the photos, all white, all young, all wealthy, lounged in spaces designed to replace what stood before him. Not a single face that looked like the people who'd built their lives here. The weight hit him all at once. Not just this church, but every building, every project, every neighborhood. He'd been erasing people, erasing history, calling it progress, calling it turning around. He looked at Rebecca, at Pastor Williams, at the grandmother whose family had literally built these walls. "I need to stop this," he said. The grandmother's expression didn't soften. "Need to? Or want to feel better about yourself?" Martin had no answer that wouldn't sound hollow. The protests started small. 20 people with signs outside his office. Within 2 weeks, it was hundreds. News cameras captured Rebecca at City Council, articulate and fierce, dismantling every justification his company had prepared. They call it urban renewal. They call it progress. But when you ask who benefits, when you count who's displaced, you see the truth. This is extraction, not development. Martin sat in the back row, watching her command the room. She used his own data, vacancy rates, median incomes, demographic shifts, to paint a damning picture. Every talking point he'd crafted, she turned inside out with precision and truth. His investors called constantly. "This is bad publicity. Just push through, they'll forget in 6 months." The easier path stretched before him, well-worn and profitable. He could ignore the protests, rubber-stamp the approvals, maintain his comfortable life. The temptation whispered, "You tried. That's more than most would do." Rebecca came to his home at midnight. She'd never come this late before. "I'm here for my final paycheck." She stood in the doorway, resignation letter folded in her hand. "I can't keep cleaning your house while you destroy mine." "Rebecca, please." Martin's voice cracked. "Tell me how to fix this." "It's not my job to educate you." Her exhaustion went bone deep. "I've been doing that for free for 12 years, in every way you refuse to see. But if you're serious, truly serious, listen to the community. Give up control. Accept that you won't be the hero of this story." She handed him the letter. "And understand, feeling guilty isn't the same as making amends. Amends require sacrifice. Real sacrifice, not just writing checks to ease your conscience, but giving up power, accepting losses, doing the work even when no one's watching to applaud you." Martin clutched the resignation. "What if I do everything wrong?" "You already have," Rebecca said quietly. "The question is whether you're willing to do what's right, even when it costs you everything you've built on other people's backs." She left him standing there, the weight of her words heavier than any empire. The emergency board meeting convened at 7 a.m. Martin stood before 12 faces that had made him wealthy. "I'm proposing we halt the church demolition." The explosion was immediate. "We're losing millions. You're being emotional. This is breach of fiduciary duty." Martin laid out the alternative. Community land trust, 50% affordable units, local ownership structures, binding agreements that gave residents control. We can still profit, just not at the expense of destroying what matters. What matters, his oldest investor said slowly, is return on investment. The vote split 6-6. As majority shareholder, Martin broke the tie. 3 investors walked out immediately, pulling $47 million. By market close, company stock had dropped 18%. The media had a field day. Billionaire has conscience crisis, ran beside his photo. Some outlets mocked him as naive. Others called it performative. The community remained skeptical. "We've heard promises before," Pastor Williams told reporters. "Let's see binding contracts." The town hall happened on a Thursday night. Martin arrived without his lawyers, without prepared remarks, without the armor of his privilege. 200 people packed the church basement, and their anger was righteous and earned. A woman spoke about 3 evictions in 5 years, always one step ahead of developers. A man described his mother dying in a nursing home 2 counties away because displacement separated them. A young teacher talked about her students scattered, their education disrupted by housing instability. Years of broken promises, decades of extraction, generations of harm. All of it poured out in that humid basement. Rebecca stood. The room quieted. Mr. Riggs wants to do better. I've seen him try. But trying isn't enough. We need binding agreements, community control, and accountability. We need power, not charity. Every eye turned to Martin. He felt the weight of expectation, the justified suspicion, the exhaustion of a community that had fought too long. "You're right," he said. "I don't deserve your trust. I need to earn it. Whatever binding agreements you need, whatever control structures, whatever accountability measures. I agree. All of it." The skepticism didn't lift. But something shifted, not forgiveness, but perhaps the possibility of something beyond endless resistance. 18 months of negotiation stretched Martin in ways boardrooms never had. He sat through community meetings that ran 4 hours, learning the language of reparative development, community land trusts, anti-displacement zoning. Rebecca joined the advisory board, paid fairly, with veto power over major decisions. Real power, not symbolic. Martin liquidated personal assets to establish a displaced families fund. Not charity, reparations. The church was preserved, renovated with his funding but under community control. Pastor Williams held the keys, made the decisions. The new development rose beside it. 50% affordable units, priority placement for families his previous projects had displaced, local hiring requirements written into every contract. His former peers turned on him with venom he hadn't expected. "You've gone soft. Betrayed your class." Country club invitations stopped. Golf foursomes found excuses. He realized with strange clarity that these friendships had always been transactional, built on shared extraction rather than genuine care. Marcus started in the summer architecture program Martin funded. 20 positions for local youth, Rebecca's son among them. The kid had talent, vision, and a perspective Martin's firm desperately needed. When Marcus presented designs that centered community gathering spaces over luxury amenities, Martin watched his senior architects lean forward with genuine interest. Trust came slowly, tentatively. Not trust in Martin, trust in the binding agreements, the legal protections, the community control structures that couldn't be dismantled on his whim. Families toured the affordable units with cautious hope. The church basement buzzed with programs. Local businesses opened in ground-floor retail spaces designated for existing residents, not chains. Rebecca found Martin reviewing blueprints late one evening. "You're learning," she said, not unkindly. "But don't expect applause. This is what you should have been doing all along." "I know." Martin looked at the plans, so different from the glass towers he'd once championed. "Does it get easier?" "No." Rebecca pulled on her coat. "But it gets more honest. And that matters more than easy ever did." She left at 7, taking the bus as always, carrying no mysterious bags this time. Just her purse, her dignity, and the knowledge that some things were finally, slowly beginning to change. 2 years later, the community center opened in the preserved church. Sunlight streamed through the restored stained glass as 200 people gathered for the celebration. Martin stood near the back, another face in the crowd. This wasn't his moment. Pastor Williams offered the blessing, his voice strong and grateful. He thanked the community organizers by name, Rebecca first among them. She stood at the front, surrounded by people she'd fought beside for years, and the pride in her face had nothing to do with Martin's money and everything to do with collective victory. Families moved into the affordable units that week. Some had been displaced 5 years ago, 7 years ago, driven from neighborhoods they'd built. Now they were coming home. Martin watched an elderly woman touch the doorframe of her new apartment, tears streaming. "Never thought I'd be back," she whispered. Marcus spoke at the ceremony, 18 now and confident. "Mr. Riggs gave me an opportunity, but Miss Johnson and this community gave me a foundation. That's what made the difference." Applause erupted. Martin clapped from the side, content to be peripheral. The elder who'd confronted him at the church found Martin after the ceremony. "You did a good thing here. Doesn't erase what came before, but it's something." Rebecca approached as the crowd thinned. "You showed up. You listened. You gave up control. That matters. But this isn't the end, Mr. Riggs." Her expression was serious, kind, and clear. "This is just the beginning of doing what's right." Martin nodded. "I spent 20 years building wealth by destroying communities. I'll spend the rest of my life building differently." The next week, they met to review plans for the next project. Community leaders filled the table, Rebecca at the head, Martin to the side with his expertise offered in service to their vision. No neat bow, no complete redemption. Just ongoing work, accountability, and cautious hope. As the meeting progressed, Martin thought about the night he'd followed Rebecca in the rain, so certain he'd catch her stealing. He'd been right about one thing. She had been taking something. She'd been taking back what developers like him had stolen. Dignity, community, home. "I'll never be the hero of this story," Martin thought, watching Rebecca lead the discussion. "Rebecca and this community are. And that's exactly as it should be." Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine.